In today's lesson, we are going to be looking at graph symmetry. And the first thing we're going to look at is symmetry across the x-axis. I'm going to start by just drawing a graph. So here's a graph that is symmetric about the x-axis. So you flip it over the x-axis and it flips on top of itself. So notice these points that I plotted here. So this is the point 1, 4, and this is the point 1, -4. So notice that those 2 points have the same x value, but then they correspond to opposite y values. So the more formal way to write that is for every point xy, then there's the point x -y, so same x, opposite y, is on the graph. So now here is a separate equation, and we're going to do like an algebraic test. If I plug in a negative y, will the result be the same x? So x equals, I'm going to plug in a negative y and see what happens. Well, negative y squared will just go back to y squared. So it goes back to the original function after you plug in a negative. So that test shows that this equation here will be symmetric across the x-axis. And then if you solve this for y, let's think about what happens. Y squared equals x -4 and now square root. Y equals plus or minus the square root of x -4. That plus or minus is what makes essentially a sideways parabola. So just another note that with symmetric across the x-axis, it's going to be something that's not a function because an x value would be going to 2 different y values, a y and a negative y. So we still have graph symmetry, but it is not a function. And now we're going to look at a graph that is symmetric across the y-axis. If it is symmetric across the y-axis, it is called an even function. So here I've sketched a graph that is symmetric across the y-axis. And if I plot some of these points, I'll have -4, 2, and then this point 4, 2. So this time, opposite x values result in same y values. Another way to write this is, so opposite x values, so x and negative x, will produce the same y values. They will be equal. And to write this out in words, for every xy, the point -xy is on the graph. So if you have a function, f of x equals -x² + 6, we're going to do a test. Is it an even function? Is it symmetric across the y-axis? So to do the test, let's find what is f of -x. So I've got negative, and then I'm plugging in -x squared plus 6. -x squared is -x² plus 6. So here's f of x, and then here is f of -x. So as you can see, if f of x is the same as f of -x, there's your algebraic test to prove y-axis symmetry. And the last symmetry, it's symmetric about the origin. And when something is symmetric about the origin, it's called an odd function. So here is an example of a graph that is symmetric about the origin. Notice how it's different from the other ones. X-axis and y-axis were reflections. This is actually a rotation about the origin of 180 degrees. And then what do you notice about the points? We have opposite x produces opposite y. So the test, if you're testing for an odd function, you're going to look to see if f of -x is equal to negative f of x. So opposite x and then produces opposite y. So another way to say that is for every point xy, The point negative x, negative y is on the graph. Okay, so here we have a function f of x equals x to the third minus 2x. And let's do the algebraic test if it's an odd function. So this is what we do here. So first, f of negative x. Let's figure out what that is. And then we're going to figure out what negative f of x is. So this means plug in negative x in for x. So negative x to the third minus 2 times negative x equals, so this would turn into negative x to the third, but then this would turn into plus 2x. So what is negative f of x? That would be a negative, and then we have the function x to the third minus 2x. So that would turn into negative x to the third plus 2x. So notice here, these are the same. So because f of negative x is the same as negative f of x, it is an odd function. So there's your full video on graph symmetry, reflecting over the x-axis, reflecting over the y-axis, and then rotating about the origin, knowing the test if something is an even function or an odd function. Good luck with your lesson.